Two recent trades for defensive tackles mean one thing for this Jets preseason finale. Everybody should feel like their job is on the line. Locked On Jets begins now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, August 22nd, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we are going to preview the final preseason game of 2025. The Jets will play the Philadelphia Eagles tonight. Kickoff time scheduled for 7:30 from MetLife Stadium, the final Jets game before the real games begin in 2025. And the Jets have made some moves to shake up their roster this week, particularly on the defensive line. They made two trades to bring in defensive tackles. In comes Harrison Phillips from Minnesota. The Jets acquired him on Wednesday. The Jets also acquired Ja'Juan Briggs on Wednesday from the Cleveland Browns, a move which remakes their defensive tackle room within just a couple of hours. And that really shakes up the battle for the roster on the defensive line. But there were also reports that the Jets are, quote unquote, monitoring the trade market for wide receivers. Now, on yesterday's show, I questioned what monitoring the trade market means, but I think that we can surmise that the Jets are going to look for upgrades at the wide receiver position. And there are clear, tangible impacts on these pieces of news for the guys on the roster right now. At the defensive tackle spot, there are now two less roster spots available than there were 48 hours ago. There are now two guys who are going to be cut who were on the verge of making the team 48 hours ago. So this is a dangerous time for defensive tackles on this team right now. And outside of Quinn and Williams and the guys they just traded for, I guess, because you're not going to trade for Harrison Phillips and then cut him. And I don't think you're going to trade for Ja'Juan Briggs and then cut him. Phillips, of the two, is the one with the more decorated career. Harrison Phillips has been in the NFL for a long time. He's been a starter in this league. I think they just brought him in to be the starter next to Quinn and Williams. Briggs has a far lesser track record. He was a seventh-round pick a year ago. He played just over 100 snaps for Cleveland. And clearly he was on the verge of being cut by Cleveland if they were willing to trade him at this time of year for a late round pick swap. But the fact that Jets traded for him, the fact that Jets did not wait for the waiver wire suggests that he's going to be on the team, which means that Derek Nandi, and there's been a lot of buzz about Derek Nandi not making this team lately. When the Jets signed him this offseason from Kansas City, the thought was that he was going to be a big part of the defensive tackle rotation. But all the buzz has been that he's been playing himself off the team. Now, Byron Cowart apparently has been banged up lately. Another guy the Jets signed this offseason, another veteran defensive tackle. But I think it sounds like he might be heading to IR. But Jay Tufele, guy who played well that first preseason game against the Green Bay Packers, he doesn't have the track record in the league that he's going to be guaranteed a roster spot. And I regret to say it because I like him and I hope he makes the team. And I hope he ends up playing a big role in the defensive line rotation. I don't think Leonard Taylor is safe right now, the undrafted rookie out of Miami a year ago, the guy who was one of the stars of the exhibition season in 2024, a guy who earned his roster spot in 2024 based on his preseason play. I think Taylor will make the team, but I can't be guaranteed of that right now. And that means that this final exhibition game has extra importance for players at the defensive tackle spot because now it's tight. When we talk about how many roster spots there are available for defensive tackles, there are going to be guys that we assumed were making this team who are now going to be cut. One last chance to make an impression. I'm really pulling for Leonard Taylor tonight because I like Leonard Taylor and I want him to be part of this team going forward. But no guarantees there, and no guarantees at the wide receiver position. Well, outside of Garrett Wilson, we know they're not going to cut Garrett Wilson, but there are lots of question marks at the wide receiver position. And the fact the Jets are floating a rumor, if nothing else, the Jets were floating a rumor that they're interested in trading for wide receivers, which tells you they're not thrilled with what they have in the room right now. And why would they be thrilled with what they have in the room right now outside of Garrett Wilson? At this point, Josh Reynolds is probably your number 2 receiver. And I'm not sure Josh Reynolds has ever been the second best receiver on any team he's ever played on in the NFL. Alan Lazard is Alan Lazard. Some buzz the Jets are still going to try and figure out a way to move on from him. Some buzz the Jets will try and trade him. I mean, who's going to trade for Lazard? I know people are going to say Pittsburgh because Aaron Rodgers is there. The Steelers just seem like too smart of an organization to do something silly like trade for Lazard. Tyler Johnson's a depth player. Arian Smith's a rookie. Malachi Corley's on the bubble. Xavier Gipson's on the bubble. These are guys who've been, either recent early round pick in Malachi Corley's case, or a guy who's been a part of the receiver room the last couple of years, a guy who's been in the mix in Xavier Gipson. These are guys who could be cut. And then you also have some guys lower on the depth chart, Brandon Smith and Jamal Pritchett. Pritchett was a UDFA signing. Smith is a guy who's been in the league a couple of years, but having a strong preseason and playing pretty well on special teams. If you've been following the special teams, Brandon Smith's actually been playing pretty well. A lot up in the air tonight. And with the fact that Jets, maybe looking to add another receiver, shows that there are guys who are going to have to make a big impact. And, I think Corley's at the top of the list. And this could be the last time we talk about Malachi Corley as a member of the New York Jets on this podcast, because I think things are looking pretty bleak for him, but things are not looking great for Xavier Gipson either. Xavier Gipson's been, again, a big part of the receiver room the last couple of years, with the new coaching staff coming in, with Gipson not really showing a lot of growth as a developing wide receiver. He could be a bit on the bubble. But I think roster wide, these trades should send a message. And it's not a huge message. I don't want to make it sound like these trades show that Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji are, the greatest GM head coach combo in the league now. But the one thing I do like about this is these trades show that, if nothing else, the Jets are not going to stand pat if they're not happy with players at a certain position. Because it's one thing to trade for one guy at a position at the end of training camp. It's another to make 2 trades, to bring in 2 guys to try and upgrade a position group at the end of training camp. And we've seen this so many times with past Jets regimes, with regimes all across the NFL. Lots of teams aren't thrilled with what they've got, but they won't make moves. They won't look to upgrade. And I think that this series of moves, the last couple of days when the Jets had 2 defensive tackles, if nothing else, it should put everybody on the roster at notice that if you're not producing, if we don't have somebody good at your position group, we're not afraid to go outside and make a move to improve to improve the position group. So I think that this maybe adds to the stakes of this preseason game. And if we're going to be honest, this is the backup bowl. Usually the Jets and Eagles play, not every year, but most years the Jets and Eagles play the final preseason game. The starters seldom play. If they do play, they maybe get a series or 2 at most. There's not a lot of drama in this final preseason game. What the Jets have done with these 2 trades is not necessarily made this game super dramatic, but it's clearly added to the stakes. It's clearly put a lot on the line, because I think that even if you're not a defensive tackle right now, you see the Jets making moves. You see the Jets bringing in outside guys. It's a spot where they were not happy. You know that if you don't produce, the next guy who comes in could be your replacement. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, let's talk about the offensive skill spots, because going beyond wide receiver, there are some roster battles that still are probably not settled at this point. And tonight is a last chance to submit a closing case for a couple of young guys who are not yet established in this league. We'll talk about who they are and what they need to do as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season's back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. This year, me and Locked On Jets are playing Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. I've played Yahoo Fantasy since 2004, and the updates they're rolling out this month are wild, and I mean that in the best way. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. And to kick it off, they just dropped the Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. And with the new season around the corner, now is time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. Or if you're more into the classics, you can still play head-to-head in private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And if you are new to the show, thank you so much for joining us. We have an exciting season of Jets football ahead. But to get to that exciting season of Jets football, we have to get through the backup bowl. Tonight, the Jets will take on the Philadelphia Eagles, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, locally on WCBS2 in New York. Iron Eagle and the Hall of Famer J.J. Watt will be on the call to close out Jets preseason. And these games can be tough to watch. The quality of these games is not particularly high, but I do think there are a couple of reasons these games, especially the final preseason game, is worth watching for fans. Number one is you get an opportunity to see players that you may not see until halfway through the regular season. But there might be a critical point where you have an injury and a depth player needs to step into a starting role for a couple of weeks. And because you play the backups in this game, this is really your last chance to see them and get to know them before you reach that point. The second reason to watch these games is that there are roster battles still to be decided. This is the final opportunity for teams to get a look at players before cutdown day comes. Cutdown day is just a couple of days away, and this is the final exhibition game for coaches to evaluate, the final chance for players to state their case that they deserve a spot on the roster. And I think at the offensive skill spots, there are a couple of roster battles that are still outstanding, and I think that there's a position battle that is still outstanding. As far as the roster battle goes, I think it's down to one spot between two running backs. I think when you look at the running back position, the guys who are locks are obviously Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, and Isaiah Davis. Those are going to be your top three backs. And based on the way Aaron Glenn's been talking, based on the way the Jets have used these guys in preseason, I think it's going to be Hall, Allen, Davis in that order to start the regular season, and then we'll see what happens moving forward. That last spot is going to be Kene Nwangwu versus Donovan Edwards. Nwangwu, guy Jets brought in last season, had a monster game on special teams against the Seattle Seahawks. That was a game I was at. I declared Kene Nwangwu my new favorite player after that game. Edwards is an undrafted free agent signing out of Michigan. And Edwards is a guy who does not evoke a lot of debate. I think almost everybody who watches him knows that he has distinct pros and distinct cons to his game. The pros are that he's got good skill as a pass catcher, and he's got some breakaway speed. And you even saw that in the first exhibition game of 2025, where he broke a 73-yard touchdown run. Now, it was called back for a holding penalty. So, if you're looking in the stat sheet, you may say, well, wait a minute, he didn't have a 73-yard touchdown run in that game. He didn't even run for 73 yards. Well, that's because he was called back by a holding penalty. But without the holding penalty, you still saw breakaway speed. That was still an example of a trait that he's got. And pass catching ability, which in the NFL is becoming more and more important. Teams are using the running backs in the passing game more and more. And also the NFL is embracing, as time goes on, and this has been a decades-long trend, more and more of the passing game is becoming shorter, higher efficiency in the NFL. So using your running backs in the passing game is a big advantage. Kene Nwangwu, again, good return guy, and last week showed some ability as a runner. Ran tough between the tackles, and not only that, there was one excellent blitz pickup against the Giants. And you always want one back, especially if he's going to play in a receiving role, who can pass block. It's an underrated skill, but it's a skill that coaches really, really value. I would say right now, Nwangwu probably has the lead in that roster battle. A week ago, I would have said Edwards, in part because I wasn't sure that Nwangwu would win the return job. But after an excellent game against the Giants, I think Nwangwu was in the pole position for the return job, which could leave Edwards as the odd man looking out. But there is still one game left. There's still one last opportunity. And then we could look at the tight end room. And I think in the tight end room, there's a position battle still outstanding. And that's the number two tight end role. That's between Jeremy Ruckert and Stone Smartt. And most of us assumed Ruckert would have the number two tight end role, but you're starting to hear rumblings. maybe Stone Smart's going to take that number 2 tight end job. Now, obviously, Mason Taylor, the second round pick out of LSU, is going to be the number 1 tight end for the Jets. The number 2 tight end job, though, Stone Smart might be stealing it. He had a 24-yard touchdown catch on a screen in the first preseason game, playing pretty solid football in preseason, and then had kind of like a highlight reel block of Abdul Carter where he kind of took Abdul Carter off his feet. He knocked Abdul Carter over on a chip before releasing it into a pattern. Ruckert, has not looked great in preseason, and it really has not been great for Ruckert during his 3 seasons in the NFL. If we're going to be honest, that when the Jets drafted him in the 3rd round of 2022, the hope was that he'd eventually develop into a starting caliber tight end. And I think it's fair to say, this might be harsh, but I don't even think he's developed into a backup caliber tight end yet at this point in time. He has not displayed a ton of skill as a receiver, and his blocking is inconsistent. I recently referred to Ruckert as like kind of the Denzel Mims of blocking, because every now and then you see like this super highlight reel play, and that almost leads you to believe that there's much more upside in him than there really is. We are now entering year 4 with Ruckert, and he still has not gotten consistent with his hand placement. He has effort. Look, he shows effort. He likes to block, and that's important. I mean, there's some tight ends who don't like to block, but at some point you got to see the pieces come together. You got to see consistency. And Ruckert has not shown consistency. And I also think that, you might wonder, is Ruckert's spot on this roster guaranteed? Now, I think Ruckert probably makes it, in part because Zach Kuntz is also in the mix, and Zach Kuntz has probably shown less than Ruckert at this point. But I'm not totally convinced Ruckert makes it. I mean, tight end's not a strong position for the Jets. Could they do something like keep 3? It would not be unprecedented for a team to keep only 3 tight ends. And right now you've got Taylor, you've got Stone Smartt, and then depends on what you want to call Andrew Beck. Andrew Beck's kind of playing the fullback role for the Jets, so people list him as a running back, but he's also lining up at tight end. And Andrew Beck's actually looking pretty good. And if you had an injury and you needed Andrew Beck to get more out of Andrew Beck at tight end, it's not entirely clear that at this point that you'd be losing much by going from Ruckert to Beck. So I think that right now we are kind of moving in a direction where the number 2 tight end spot is tilting towards Stone Smartt. I still think Ruckert will hold on to a roster spot, but barely. That said, I can't rule out Ruckert losing his roster spot with a poor performance. I think Ruckert's a guy who really, really needs a big game. And outside of that, I think that Stone Smartt might be able to clinch the number 2 tight end job if he comes up with a big performance in this game against the Philadelphia Eagles. Another thing to watch is, when do these guys go into the game? Because if Stone Smartt goes into the game early and gets pulled, that could be a sign that this thing is really moving in his direction. One of the kind of the hacks to figure out where guys stand according on the coaching staff's hierarchy is watch when they enter preseason games. The earlier they enter, the higher on the hierarchy they are. If you don't play in a preseason game, odds are that means the coaching staff really likes you. So that's another thing to keep it just beyond performances. When a player enters and when a player exits can have a big role in explaining how a coaching staff views a player. So keep an eye on that as we conclude these offensive position battles. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about the defensive side of the ball. We know that on the defensive line, there's a lot up in the air after the Jets made 2 trades this week for defensive tackles. But in the back end of the defense, there are also some roster battles to be sorted. We'll talk about the hottest ones as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. These days, it feels like there's advice for everything: cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes. But how do you know what actually works for you? With so much information online about mental health and wellness, it can be overwhelming to figure out what's true and what will actually help. That's where talking to a licensed therapist through BetterHelp can make all the difference. You get real personalized guidance instead of just guessing based on something you saw on social media. Having a trusted professional to talk things through with can help cut through the noise and keep you focused on what matters most. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, serving more than 5 million people. It's easy to fit into a schedule, just a click to connect, and you can even switch therapists at any time if you need to. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Friday. The Jets preseason concludes tonight, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Shown locally on WCBS2 in New York, the Jets will take on the Philadelphia Eagles in the Backup Bowl, the final preseason game. We will not see many of the starters. Aaron Glenn indicated he's going to keep a lot of his starters on the bench. Maybe you'll see one or two along the way. This game does have stakes, though, because it is the final opportunity for Jets players to show that they belong on the team. It's a final opportunity to before cutdown day to show what you can do. And on the defensive backfield, I think that there are some things that are unsettled for this team, particularly at the cornerback position. Now, I think, there are some guys we know are going to be on the team who are corners. I mean, Sauce Gardner is obviously going to be on the team. Brandon Stevens is going to be on the team. Michael Carter II is going to be on the team. Azariah Thomas is going to be on the team. But after that, there are question marks. After that, it's not entirely clear, who makes the cut and who does not. And there are two recent late round picks the Jets made, Qwan'tez Stiggers and Jarrick Bernard-Converse, who are competing for a roster spot right now. And it's possible the Jets end up keeping both of them, especially with the recent injury to Chris Boyd. But they may be competing for one spot. I really think that when the Jets drafted Qwan'tez Stiggers last year, and they drafted him out of CFL, really interesting story. He never played college football. Family tragedy left him distressed. His mother signed him up for this minor professional league, and he caught the attention of somebody in the CFL. He ended up going to the CFL, pplaying well for the Toronto Argonauts, and getting drafted in the NFL. First player ever drafted from the CFL. Incredible stuff. They're going to make a movie about Qwan'tez Stiggers no matter how his career turns out, because it's really a remarkable story for him to have even made the NFL. The question now is, can that movie get even better? Can Qwan'tez Stiggers turn into a good player? And I think it has been a mixed bag through preseason for Qwan'tez Stiggers. I think that he's played well on special teams, but he has struggled in covers. There was a long touchdown the Jets gave up against the Giants where I'm not sure it was Stiggers' fault per se. I think Andre Sisco was really the culprit on that play. But Stiggers, I think did have a hand in that play turning ugly for the Jets. But other than that, there's been a lot of inconsistency with how he's covered. And he had an interception against the Giants, but that was really just kind of a miscommunication between Russell Wilson and his receiver. It wasn't like Stiggers baited a throw or jumped around. An interception kind of fell into his lap. Whereas Jarrick Bernard-Converse may not have the standout play on special teams at this point, but has been really solid. And this is 2 straight preseasons where Jarrick Bernard-Converse has been playing solid football, where he's looked good. And I don't know what else a guy can do when he's low on the depth chart, when he was a late round pick, but go out and play effectively in preseason. And the competition he's going against, it's not the greatest competition, if we're going to be honest, but he can't control that. All he can do is go out there and play effectively. And at some point, if you cover well enough, you deserve to be on the football team. You deserve to be there. I don't know if Bernard-Converse is going to make the team. I think that it's very up in the air, but there's an old saying, you can control what you can control. Jarrick Bernard-Converse can't control, the numbers the Jets have. Jarrick Bernard-Converse cannot control whether Aaron Glenn and Darren Mucci came in with a pre-existing opinion on him. What he can control is going out and playing good football. And there's an old cliche, which is true, is that your film is your resume. And if it doesn't work out for Bernard-Converse, if he plays well tonight, he'll have an opportunity maybe to catch on somewhere else, maybe catch on a practice squad. But there's also an opportunity to change minds. There's also an opportunity to convince the Jets that you're worthy of a roster spot. That's what's on the line for Jarrick Bernard-Converse tonight. And one other guy I've got my eye on in the defensive backfield, Dean Clark, who admittedly against Green Bay had kind of a rough night, but may have been the best Jets player on the field against the Giants. And I think based on that Giants performance, Dean Clark has clinched probably at least a practice squad spot. And this is one thing that we kind of forget, that there's the battle for a roster. You have to cut from 90 to 53. So lots of guys are going to be cut over the next couple of days. But beyond that, there's also a battle to earn the Jets' attention for practice squad spots, because there's only 16 or so of those practice squad spots available. Again, you're cutting from 90 to 53, and then another 16 make the practice squad. So I think what Dean Clark did against the Giants was clinch a practice squad slot at the very least. I mean, I think that, when you saw that performance, you saw enough upside to justify a spot on the practice squad, where in practice squad, if you're not familiar with that, teams are allowed to sign 16, 17 players. There's like a bonus spot for an international player, but these guys practice with the team during the week, and they can be called up. They can be activated for games on Sundays. They make far less money, so you'd rather be on the 53-man roster. And you also, your situation is very precarious when you're on the practice squad. But there's a chance to practice with the team, impress the coaches, and eventually earn a spot on the 53-man roster. I think Dean Clark has earned that, if nothing else. Can he earn a spot on the roster? Well, I don't know that there's that much talent in the defensive backfield. And I'd say that's particularly true at the safety position, where there's just not a lot of not a lot of talent there. I mean, I like Andre Cisco as a signing, even though he made me look terrible against the Giants. Maybe Malachi Moore's got something. Tony Adams will be in the mix, but after that, there's not a lot guaranteed there. So I think Dean Clark's got an opportunity to perhaps steal a roster spot with another big performance. And because when you're talking about the bottom of the roster guys, you're not expecting guys who are going to be great NFL players this year. And there's very little chance Dean Clark's going to be a great player this year for the New York Jets. You're just talking about like who's the best of these options. And frequently what that last spot comes down to is, who do you think has the most upside? Who do you think has the most chance to develop? And if you're playing big in the preseason, if you're standing out at this time of the year, even if you're going up against backups, it shows that at least there's some talent in you that could be worth developing. Shows that maybe you're worth keeping around. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast for us, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. That helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy the preseason finale. We'll be back next time to break it down and talk more Jets.